Yes, but let's put it this way. My claim is that opportunity is being hoarded, right? At the top of the economic ladder, opportunity is widespread. You can do very well. The farther you get down the economic ladder, the less opportunity there is, and the greater the danger of your falling off the bottom, right? In some communities, you start off the bottom,
yes,
right? And you cannot access the ladder up. In such cases, it is not surprising that people resort to crime. The reason most people do not resort to crime is that they have better options. And
right.
People are wired to pick better options. So let's talk about a couple things.
Okay.
And I do hope we get to some science at some point. But
we got a lot of time, brother.
Good. All right. So let's talk for a second about why the black community has a special problem in America. Can we talk about that?
Sure.
All right. So I want to talk about two things. One has to do with the special origin story for the African-derived population of Americans. Obviously, slavery is where most African Americans come from. They arrived through that mechanism. But slavery has a special interaction with the normal structures of being a human being. Right? So a human being is sort of a generalist creature with a capacity to have its software reworked for different habitats. The reason that human beings are able to exploit every terrestrial habitat where plants grow is that they don't all have the software program that's the same, right? You can have a software program for hunting in the Kalahari, you can have one for terracing the Andes to grow potatoes, you can have any one of a number of software programs. Well, slavery took the software program that Africans who were brought into the slave trade had, and it did its best to erase that program and to render that program non-functional. It rendered it non-functional by combining people from different places who didn't even necessarily speak a language, so there was not one culture available. And it sort of forces the bootstrapping of a new culture, which was composed of various things, but of course there was prohibition against teaching slaves to read and things like that. So there was a systematic breaking of the original culture that Africans had who were in the New World, and a substituting of a version that was not as much of a threat to the slaveholding population, right? And at the point that slavery comes to an end, it is not as if, frankly, we didn't even have the tools to talk about these things in responsible terms. There wasn't enough known about how the mind works and what its relationship is to the body and all. So the thing that makes the black population and the Indian population different, I would argue, is the systematic hobbling of the onboard, the inherited, evolved culture. In the case of Indians, by transporting them to reservations and by putting them in schools that disrupt the passage of normal culture. And in the case of Africans, it was breaking apart of families, keeping people from being in contact with others whom they had the right language to talk to in the home. So in any case, that carries through to the present. It creates a situation where there has not been access to the materials to fully bring, to fully update software. Am I making sense? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
You're speaking about this almost purely from like an evolutionary biology perspective.
Yes, and I'm afraid that it's not properly going to come through. What I'm saying is that when you have one population in control of how another population accesses the shared culture, that it's never fair, right? And so we saw this with conquistadors who came into the New World and were forcing Catholicism on the Inca, for example.
Sure.
Right. So there's always this attempt to hand off culture that serves the powerful and undermines those who might rebel against them. Okay. Now let's go back to the question of how opportunity is distributed. Okay, so for some populations you have very little opportunity and you have a tremendous hazard of falling off the bottom of the ladder and there's not enough mechanism to allow you to get back to it. That creates crime. Let's say that those who control or who write the rules of the system do not want a revolt, even though this scenario would set them up for it, right? So one thing that happens is you create a tendency to incarcerate, right? You have rules that free certain people out of opportunity, and then you have a system that is capable of incarcerating massive numbers of them, and we incarcerate a much larger fraction of our population than any comparable nation, right? And a very disproportionate fraction of people in that system are black. So here's the part that I don't hear discussed. When you take men out of a population, it has a very predictable effect. You take men out of a population, it undercuts the bargaining position of women in mating and dating. Right? So if you take men out of the population, it means that those men who are still present in that population are in very high demand. Right? Now, men being men, if they're in high sexual demand, it is hard to get them to settle down. Right? A man who has lots of options is much harder to persuade to become monogamous and participate in traditional family raising. Okay? So what that does is it creates an environment in which you have many more single-parent homes, many more children growing up without their fathers present, which of course hobbles the kids who are raised in that situation, because humans are so difficult to raise. They're so costly in terms of time, energy, and resources that one person has a much harder time doing it than a team of two people. And this sets in motion all of the things for which white society imagines that there's some cause inside of being black, when in fact it's a demographic process that unfolds very naturally if you remove a disproportionate number of men from a population and undermine women's bargaining position. Is that making sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so why are we not having that discussion, and why are we instead talking about shutting down STEM? STEM is exactly what you need in order